You can ask the questions to any one of the speakers now. Who would like to ask the first question?
Just an observation. I was patenting what we do, and the thing that stopped me more than anything else was the fact that even if I got a patent, I can only defend it if I've had enough money. So the people with the deepest pockets would be able to overwhelm any defense that I may have vis-a-vis the patent. So that is a real consideration about going through the pain and trouble of getting a patent. Even when you do get it, then you may have plenty of spurious and sometimes real people attacking you on that.
Yeah, so let me phrase it differently. So the thing with the defensive strategy on patents for a startup is that if you think about it, it's not about necessarily whether you can enforce it either. I mean, as a startup, but it's maybe the acquirer can enforce it. So in other words, the patent maybe for you, it's like, well, what am I going to do with it? But Google might look at it and say, well, I can do something with it. And then once Google acquires you, that patent, all of a sudden the value of that patent changes. Not to advocate again for patents, because I think, again, it's situation specific. I mean, the other thought, and there's been quite a bit of stuff in the blogosphere on the Google acquisition, but somebody wrote somewhere, you know, Google spent, I don't know, $12 billion on the acquisition of Motorola, and it was primarily an IP play. Imagine what Google could do in terms of product innovation with $12 billion. That's it. I'll leave it at that.
How much does it cost to patent something?
So it's a process, but typically to prepare a full patent application, we usually estimate at least about 10 grand, about $10,000. But for provisional, you know, we can do it for about $3,000. So it's a much more faster, cheaper alternative to get something filed. But that's just to get the patent application prepared and filed. Then you have to prosecute it through the patent office. So the patent office is going to come back with what is an office action. So that, you know, you're going to draft this patent and put it in, and then you're not going to hear from them for 2 to 3 years. And then they'll write back to you, and the first thing they'll say is like, no, you can't patent this because of this, this, and this. And then your patent agent is going to sit down and say, well, no, we can. And then it's kind of a negotiation, and then basically we're advocating on your behalf, and that adds to the cost. So you might look at $20,000, $25,000 more by the time you actually get the patent registered.
So on the big backlog that are in the patent offices, do they actually do through the research on the patent application of companies, or like, for example, if you have an open source product and then a company is trying to patent that, will the research office, the patent office, do research on what's been available before the patent application was done?
Yeah, so the patent office has people with different backgrounds and specialties. So, you know, they will understand that technology, and they'll do a search on the prior art, which is the patent registry and other information that's publicly available. But you raise an interesting point. I mean, part of the challenge, or what happened, particularly in the late 90s, where there was a major decision in the States which basically opened the door for business method patents or software patents to an extent, you know, to a larger extent than what was available before. So you had this flood of software patent applications, and the challenge, and you know, some of the criticism from a lot of people in the software industry in particular, was that the people who were sitting there evaluating the patents on the USPTO side were electrical engineers who didn't know anything about software. They knew about, you know, chip design and hardware and communications but they really didn't understand software. So a lot of people you speak to in the software industry will tell you that there's tons of patents registered at the USPTO on software that really shouldn't be, because, I don't know, the algorithms existed for 20 years, you know, but just the person who was evaluating the patent wasn't aware or didn't have the knowledge. So there is that slight issue, but I think that's kind of caught up, and at the same time there's a lot of, I mean, there's a major patent reform movement and legislation going through the U.S. Congress even right now, because I think people realize that while the patent system was set up to foster innovation, you know, particularly in certain industry sectors, the pendulum may have swung a bit too far on the other side in terms of, you know, having stuff issued and that really shouldn't be issued, and it might actually be having an anti-innovation impact, if you will. So, but that's a whole long answer to your question.
Hello everyone, my name is Zeenat. My question is directed to Michael. Michael, I'd like to know, how did you, while starting a company, did you consider the risks? Because you said there were 2 or 3 rounds of funding, and then is there any thoughts of exit strategy, or is there anything at all? How did you do all this in terms of economic crisis which is going on and the environment which is we are facing today? How did you do all this?
So in terms of thinking of the risks, no, I didn't. Honestly, I wouldn't recommend it. I think in retrospect, even though we ended up succeeding, it was probably a very kind of risky and not very
Would you say it was
responsible.
more like a gamble? 'Cause
Yeah, for sure. It was a very personal decision because it's something that I felt I had to do. But I think if when we're to analyze it rationally about whether it was a sensible decision, I would say probably not. And I totally, when people ask me like, should they start a company, most of the time the answer is probably no. It's a very risky, kind of a crazy thing to do. So I really, it was just through disregard of the risk that I started it. Like, it wasn't a rational thing, I guess.
Just to get like heads on.
Pretty much, yeah. It was
anything about the environment, the economic crisis?
No, I honestly never considered
How
it.
did you go from first stage to the next stage? If there was no business plan?
Nope, there was no business plan. It was, I don't know, I guess this is kind of how a lot of companies get started, just kind of irresponsible young people that do crazy things, and I don't know, somehow it works out in the end. Yeah, so, you know, we did manage to secure some funding. It was a very difficult, very painful process. I think the fact that we were in Canada made it somewhat more difficult because there's just so much less activity on the angel investor side, just like an order of magnitude less than you would see in the Valley, like in Silicon Valley or even in Boston or New York. So that actually made it very difficult. We were lucky. I mean, we were within weeks away of me having to like sell my car to pay for rent. Like, that's how bad it got at one point. And I'm by no means am I unique in that sense either. Pretty much every entrepreneur you'll talk to will tell you how they had to mortgage their house, or they had to, go right to the limit of what they thought they would do before they finally kind of the light, shone on them and they managed to pull through. And most don't. Most go through that and fail. Like, I don't know what the failure rate, but I think it's something like 90-95%. So, yeah. So I guess to answer your question, there was no real, on my part, there was no real consideration about whether it was a smart idea to do it. It just seemed like something I had to do for personal reasons.
Thank you so much.
So Mike, you followed your personal passion, and are you enjoying the outcome?
Yeah, it's been incredible.
Why won't you recommend it to others?
Well, because I look at it as a probabilistic thing. Like, the probability of my success was very low. So even though in retrospect it worked out, the actual decision to do it was not a good decision. It's sort of like when you're playing poker. You can play the right hand and lose. It was still the right hand to play.
But with that caution, you would recommend it to people?
It needs to be the kind of thing that you can't imagine yourself doing anything else. Like, you can't be happy as a person unless you're doing a startup or creating something like a business.
You gotta have the passion, yeah.
Yeah, if you like, that's the only reason I would say to do it. That's
Any more questions?
My question is to Arshia. So, just wondering, so if a patent that is registered in Canada, would it hold valid even outside of Canada?
No, so patents are based on, it's in each jurisdiction, you have to file. And there's systems of priority that you can claim back, and you have a certain period of time from when you file in Canada to file elsewhere. But just because you have a patent in Canada doesn't mean you can prevent somebody in China or Japan from practicing that invention. You have to go and actually file in every single jurisdiction.
Well, it's pretty much a very expensive process of creating a product or a software.
Yeah, that's why also part of the whole strategy, again, going back to my whole talk, is that you really look at it as part of your overall business strategy. So even in terms of where you're going to file, you're going to look at where your main markets are. So that's why with a lot of our clients, most of the cases, the primary market is the U.S. and then secondary Canada. So those are the two places that we file. But if you happen to be selling, in a particular sector, let's say if you're dealing, we have a client in the solar space, and Germany and Spain have great solar, booming solar industries, and those are markets where they have customers, and those would be two jurisdictions they'd look at. Maybe they don't care whether in Malaysia somebody's infringing on their patent.
All right, we had a wonderful session today. Our next session is on October 20th. It's on financing your startup. So very, very important topic, and we have a very exciting panel. We look forward to see you there. Please fill your feedback forms. That's a personal favor that I request from each one of you. And allow me to thank this wonderful panel that we had today. Mike, you were a very sweet surprise. I didn't know whether we were going to land up here, but it's great that you came, and we're very happy that Trish recommended you. Dr. Kumar, Arshia, and Glenn, thank you very much. I will request the Thai president to just give them as a token of our appreciation.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed the session, and thank you very much to all the speakers. Before I call the speakers for a small token of appreciation, I'd like to also raise toast or applaud our program director Lalit Guglani and associate director Carl Miranda. They have put all these sessions, they work very hard, all for weeks together to structure and plan and solicit all the speakers. So thank you for arranging. Okay. I'd like to give this a small token to Arshia. For Greg. Thank you. Michael, thank you very much. And Dr. Sunny Kumar. Well, thank you very much, and see you next week on 20th on Financing Your Startup. Thank you.